Next, speaking of police, no, we're not speaking of police. We're speaking of rental regulations. Beginning at page 7 is the report of the Ad Hoc Committee on Rental Regulations. The full report is actually in a separate little packet that came with our agendas. Ms. Moran, do you have a motion?
Yes, this report was recommended to the council by the full committee. So I move, effective March 27th, 2017, to accept the final report of the Ad Hoc Committee on Rental Regulations and Enforcement and to disband the Ad Hoc Committee.
Is there a second to Ms. Moran's
You don't
motion?
need a second because it's a committee recommendation.
Yeah, it's not a council committee. Not a council
right.
committee. Moved and seconded. Would you like to address your motion, Ms. Moran?
Yes. First of all, I would like to thank very much the members of the Planning and Zoning Commission who assisted us. I mean, it was a joint commission. The members of the Planning and Zoning Commission who joined the council were Joanne Goodwin, who resigned about a couple of months ago and was replaced by Paul Aho, and Charlie Osberger. Members of the town council were, and Vera Ward also. So there were 3 and 3. And the council members were Bill Ryan, Mark Sargent, and myself. We were very ably staffed by both town staff and planning and zoning staff, Linda Painter, Janelle Mullen, Mike Ninto, and Matt Hart. So our original charge was to review rental regulations and to listen to some of the proposals that were being made for improving the quality of residential neighborhoods, and finally to see what we could do to integrate zoning and housing regulations. Very significant work was achieved, and I would like to focus a little bit on what actually happened and what we actually achieved. Let's see. First of all, we made a major contribution toward community outreach and education. There are several things that we did regarding rental regulations. For example, everybody who registers a deed in the town now gets a very visible notice that there are special regulations if the house is converted to a rental. In addition, a postcard went to every homeowner in the town notifying them that there were rental regulations, that some of them had changed, and giving connection to the online resources. In addition, we made the online resources much more available through the website. We also, Janelle Mullen from Planning and Zoning also attended the International Town Gown Association and established relationships with other towns where similar situations occur. It was interesting, by the way, to discover that we are really quite far ahead of a lot of other towns by being proactive and having well-developed regulations and an enforcement process that's well documented. In addition, we did some really significant enforcement changes. We now collaborate between building inspection and planning and zoning enforcement. Planning and zoning has the occupancy regulations, and we have linked both the occupancy and the building code inspections so that when a house is inspected, the building inspector can notify the planning and zoning department of potential violations and have those checked out. In addition, we changed the ordinances for the certification of rental housing so that if there are violations either of planning and zoning rules or of the nuisance ordinance or the building code, that that will be taken into consideration before the issuance of a rental certificate. In addition, they've systematized the inspections so that everybody gets inspected for an appropriate time frame for off-street parking ordinance as well as rental certificates. We have a series of final recommendations. The first has to do with diversifying housing options, which has to do with planning and zoning's plans for multifamily housing. But more important than that, we are really encouraging the development of additional on-campus housing, and that will be done through the Town University Relations Council Committee, the Town Council, and Planning and Zoning. This is an ongoing work. The data which was given to us earlier this evening is going to have to feed into that relationship as well. We're also encouraging planning and zoning. The Town Council will encourage planning and zoning to develop regulations that promote the development of multi-unit housing in areas that are appropriate in order to mitigate neighborhood impacts. Third, under this, the town manager and planning and zoning will be looking at developing a housing trust fund, which will support affordable and workplace housing programs, which may include a home buyer assistance program with owner occupancy requirements. And finally, one of the real issues for us is that single-family homes, the older single-family homes in particular, are not moving as quickly as people need them when they go onto the market. And so we will be looking and doing some real marketing of Mansfield, including a branding effort with a focus on bringing single families back into town so that the houses will be attractive to those families and not so easily sold for rental. The series of recommendations for university-town relationships, particularly in regard to off-campus student behavior that's problematic. You can see those in the report, and we will stay in touch with this on them. A very important part of this is landlord outreach. One of the real difficulties we have had over the last many years is that landlords aren't organized as an organization. They don't share lease potential terms and leases that would help them manage student behavior better. And so we are really working to encourage responsible landlord practices. Secondly, we'll consider later this evening a fee reduction for well-managed properties, a reduction on the rental complaints that these registration fees are really burdensome, and it does make sense to offer a lower fee if the town staff does not have to do as much work on enforcement. So you will see that proposal later this evening. And finally, a real effort on expanding community policing, particularly with the addition of a municipal police officer, which you will also hear more about as the budget progresses. In particular, maintaining the relationship with community standards and with the university, found that students are as responsive to threats of university sanctions as they are to actual bills in the mail, tickets. So the final recommendation was to promote additional community service opportunities for students, especially students living off campus. One of the things we've learned is that when students have a real relationship with the community they're living in, the behavior tends to improve. So we're working on that. Now, we came to the position of recommending that this is a final report and that the committee be disbanded because we think we have gone as far as we could with the charge that we had. There were enough we determined were legally impossible. It is not legally possible to have a moratorium on the creation of rental housing. We had that advice from our attorney on several occasions, and that has really had to be put off the table. So We didn't do everything that people wanted us to do. I think there will probably be additional suggestions over time of things we could do that would make this situation better. By recommending the disbanding of the committee, we are not saying that the council's work is done on this. We think there will be more suggestions as we come, but we don't believe that it's necessary or appropriate to continue to meet just in case something arises. So our recommendation to you is that you accept our report and that the actions that are recommended be taken, and that you disband this particular ad hoc committee.
Okay. Any additional comments, questions of Councilor Moran? Ms. Raymond?
With regard to the recommendations and making certain that there's follow-through, how do we go about that, Mr. Hart? What's your recommendation?
Well, you could add it certainly to your council goals that you adopt on a periodic basis. So that we can track it there.
And just one last item, the recommendation about additional student housing on campus. I know that economically the town is looking forward to having housing, including student housing, developed privately, because certainly we're going to want to see the tax revenues. But at the same time, I think it's very important, and I'm not sure there's a real concerted effort other than just talking about it at Town Gown or with the university. And what about the suggestion that was put before us is that this council actually go on the record in writing that we would like the university, through the state legislature, whatever other mechanisms, to put focus on some on-campus housing. I appreciate, again, that there will be plenty of housing that will be built off campus, but I don't think they should be let off the hook in any way, shape, or form from their responsibilities to provide housing.
Well, actually, I would respond to that. I actually don't know, and it didn't come out in Ms. Schaefer's comments. I actually don't know for certain how many empty beds they have right this minute on campus. So that's a piece of data that I'm missing, but I would like to know. Ms. Keene?
Yeah, it's actually, those were my thoughts as well. I was thinking right of that statement that Ms. Schaefer gave us, and I was curious if your committee had ever discussed that possibility of having the town do something directly to the state legislature or to the committee on education or whatever the appropriate place would be, to say that not providing on-campus housing is detrimental to the town. Did that come up?
We did not talk about that. However, it's in the report that the council should work with the university and to do that. And I did not see that as part of the committee's charge to take a legislative approach. But if the council wants to do that, that's up to the council. The question about empty beds, we did have a report at one point from the university that indicated that they did have empty beds in the spring semester, and they were having trouble filling some of them. So I think that at least at initial stage, there are two places to do this. One of them is with Town Gown Committee, and the other is through our planning director who sits on university planning organizations. If the council wants to go beyond that, that's the council's decision.
Okay, additional comments on Ms. Moran's motion? Okay. Oh, Mr. Shaken. Sorry, I've got to keep turning my head, but thank you for pointing that out, Mr. Hart. Mr. Shaken.
Thank you, Mayor. I think to Councilor Raymond and Councilor Keene's and Councilor Moran's thoughts, we're voting to adopt these recommendations, and the first one is to encourage more on-campus housing. And so I think to your question, Councilor Raymond, about how to follow up on this, I think it should be on us as a council to decide whether we add stuff to goals or whether we do things more immediately to say, oh, for a future agenda, we'd like to consider writing a letter to the university or something like that
It's going to be put on the
in
agenda, but-
pursuant to, recommendation number 1, letter A of the thing that we are saying we adopt by voting for this. So I think there's a number of things in here, some big and some small, like writing a letter, that we can do, that we don't need to maintain a standing committee to do based on their recommendations. And there's stuff that other boards and commissions and staff can do too.
Mr. Katzenberger.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I agree with Mr. Shaken on that. I mean, of course, the purpose of an ad hoc committee by definition is to conduct a specific project and then make the recommendations, which I think I agree with most of them, and then send it back to the committees that work in the town council and planning and zoning that do this full time. So I certainly agree with with that option. We have certainly pushed at Uconn, and we should continue to do so, to house more students on campus. I mean, when they were here in 2016, we certainly made that clear, and we got some pushback from them as well. But we have, in a variety of times and over the years, talked about not only generally the problem, but asked Uconn to do more about it. It may be that a more direct approach is necessary, but I also don't want to leave the impression that we have somehow not pushed Uconn to do this. I am also, and I don't know if I'm characterizing the mayor's point of view, I also was somewhat frustrated at not quite knowing the number of beds that were open, closed, and of course the spring statistics, unless they take into account the fact that a certain number of students drop out and it's hard to fill the beds at that point, don't give us an indication that in fact there's not more demand for campus housing, a point we made to them in which I don't think we ever got a response back.
Additional comments on Ms. Moran's resolution, proposed motion? This time I'm looking both ways and I don't see any hands. All in favor, raise your hand. Passed unanimously. Thank you, and thank your colleagues on the committee for all your hard work, Tony. Next,
And the staff. The staff really worked very hard on this, and